Welcome to part 4 of Romeo and Juliet, where we're going to look at the last two scenes of Act 1. So we already know that there's this big feud in the town. We already know that Romeo's heartbroken and that he's been encouraged to go to this party that the Capulets are throwing. And we know that Paris has been given permission he's asked Juliet's hand in marriage, okay? And there's this party going on. And in Act 1, Scene 4, we see the party crashers, Romeo and his friends, on their way to the party. And we get to meet Mercutio for the first time. But let's go ahead and see what happens in this scene. In a nutshell, Romeo, Mercutio, and Benvolio are on their way to the party. And even though Romeo says he has doubts about going, he says he's nervous, okay? As they arrive, Romeo shares, "I had a dream, and it makes me hesitant to go to the party." Yet, they go anyways. So what's Romeo thinking? One of the things that I think we can relate to is that we can get pushed into things that we might not feel good about doing because of peer pressure. And so is he just giving into peer pressure here because all his friends are going? Now they want to look out for what's best for him, which is to try to get him over Rosaline, okay? And the second thing is Romeo has this dream. And dreams back at this time are often seen as omens or signs, things that you don't take lightly. I mean, you consider what your dreams are. And the question is, what kind of sign or omen or sense should Romeo be drawing from his dream? Okay? It is foreshadowing something, as we'll talk about when we look at some of the lines of this scene. Okay? So Mercutio makes fun of Romeo's dream as a way to deal with this fear that Romeo seems to have. He tells everyone that he too had a dream about Queen Mab. And here's an idea or example where Shakespeare gets into kind of mythical legend, folklore characters such as Queen Mab. In Celtic legend, Queen Mab is a fairy who enters people's minds and plays mischief with their dreams. In other words, if Queen Mab has been playing with your dreams, you ought not to pay any attention to them. And even after Mercutio's teasing, Romeo still isn't convinced. He still has doubts, but he goes to the party anyway. And that's where we leave off, them heading up those last few steps to jump into that party. In Act 1, Scene 5, we have the entry into that party by the guys. The Capulet party is in full swing by now. They've already had supper, and now they're on to the dance. And the guys show up for that last bit of the party where that dance is going on. And the Capulet's encouraging his guests to dance. Now, Capulet doesn't dance. He's too old, but he is happy to make a good time for everybody else who's eligible to be dancing. And then right away, from across the room, Romeo sees Juliet. He thinks she's the most beautiful thing he has ever seen, and we'll take a look at that line in a minute. Do you believe in love at first sight? Because why do you think Romeo and Juliet's like the symbolic story of a love story? Okay, well, we see right away that there's love at first sight, like at first sight. Okay, you know, Rosalind is standing there and Juliet's standing there, and Romeo sees them both, and he doesn't even acknowledge Rosaline, who's at the party. We know she is. He sees Juliet right away. Okay. Interestingly, Tybalt recognizes Romeo. He hears him talking from behind the mask. It's not, remember, these guys are going with masks, so you can almost imagine them able to sneak in without being recognized because they've got a mask on. But Tybalt does recognize Romeo because he hears him talking. Okay. He tells his uncle that Romeo's at the party and he wants to fight him, but Lord Capulet tells Tybalt to endure him, let him be. Okay. And we see there might be some motive for this. Of course, the prince has already declared that anybody starting to fight or conflict because of the feud shall die. So Lord Capulet is following the law here, but he also just wants to give his guests a good time. And he also says that Romeo, he's heard, is a good, upstanding young man, so no big deal. Yet Tybalt is angry at this, and we'll look at that line, hopefully. Now, Romeo and Juliet begin to talk. They meet right away, and they do share a kiss, and then another one, until the nurse calls Juliet away. And then we could say, what? Kissing already? Do I need to remind anyone? They've only just met. Not to mention, oh yeah, what was her name? Rosaline, who's like standing on the other side of the room. Okay, what is going on here? This is kind of a quick entry into kind of passionate romance. Now, at this point, Even worse, I mean, would you kiss somebody if you don't even know who they are? Romeo has no idea that Juliet's a Capulet until he asks the nurse. We'll take a look at that line. And then Juliet doesn't know either. She asks the nurse about Romeo and finds out he's a Montague. And both react the exact same way, realizing that they've fallen in love, absolutely fallen in love at first sight, with their family's worst enemy. Oh, the tangled webs we weave. And now we can begin to see the complex conflict that is beginning to arise, the impossible love of these two characters. Let's go and take a look at my favorite lines, including a little bit of a peek at a Shakespearean sonnet that we find in this scene. Now we're going to get to my top lines of Act 1, Scene 4. And I'm going to try not to go into all the lines because it can very easily turn into all of these lines are my favorite lines. So let's scroll down to line 15-ish. What do we get here? Right up here. They're going to dance, and here's where Shakespeare plays on words all the time, and I like this. Not I, believe me, you have dancing shoes with nimble soles. I have a soul of lead. And here you have the use of the word soul and its antonym, I believe, which is soul. They sound the same, spell differently, mean different things. And it's clever play on words. With nimble souls, in other words, your feet are nimble. They can dance. But I have a soul of lead. In other words, a hard heart, and I can't dance. I can't move. My soul of lead, it's weighing me down. Clever play on words to appreciate from William Shakespeare. So I wanted to point that out. Next, we go all the way to line 50 as we scroll down here. Ish. Okay. When Romeo says, I dreamed a dream tonight. And he says that in response to, 'tis no wit to go. In other words, it's not wise to go to the party. Why? Because I dreamed a dream tonight. Okay, talked a little bit about that with our review. We'll get back to that at the end because Romeo comes back to this dream. All right. Now, Mercutio goes and talks about Queen Mab, rants and rants and rants and rants and rants and rants and rants. If you go ahead and check out the scene where we get to watch this, it's just like, what is he talking about? Okay. But he eventually gets himself so worked up that Romeo says, line 93-ish, peace, peace, Mercutio, peace. You talk of nothing. Okay, you talk nonsense. Mercutio says, true. I talk of dreams. What a clever comeback. You speak nothing. You're saying nothing. You're right. I'm talking about dreams, which are nothing. So don't pay any attention to your dream, which is what Mercutio is trying to do, is to make Romeo ignore that nervousness, that premonition he had about his own dream. So clever. You talk of nothing. You're right. I do talk of nothing. I talk of dreams, which are nothing. Clever. Okay. Next one. I like this. Supper is done, and we shall come too late. Romeo says, I fear too early. So supper's over. They're going to get there too late. But Romeo says, oh, we're going to get there too soon because I'm nervous about going. And that's clever because it's foreshadowing as well. I'm not going to tell you how, but we're going to get there too late. No, we'll get there too early. Okay. And Romeo again shows his, I fear some consequence hanging in the stars. There's some bad thing in my fateful future, is what he says. So all refers back to his dream. Okay. But he decides to go to the party anyways. All right. This is all sort of foreshadowing here. Untimely death, despised life, closed in my breast. Untimely death. This kind of like this hatred of one's own life and untimely death. These are foreshadowings of the death to come in the tragedy of the story. So here's an example of foreshadowing, which is throughout the whole story. And Shakespeare, again, will give us hint after hint after hint of the tragedy that's coming at the end of the story, which he's already told us about. Okay, let's go ahead and move to the next scene. So for Act 1, Scene 5, we're actually at the party. And I'm going to jump ahead to line 40-ish to 50. Where do we get there? Okay, there. Romeo walks in, and the first thing he says is, "What lady is that which doth enrich the hand of yonder knight?" Who's that girl? Who do you think he's pointing to? To Juliet. He sees her. "Oh," he says, "she doth teach the torches to burn bright." Her beauty is so radiant. Okay, she is the epitome or the instructor of how light should burn itself, or how light should shine itself. She teaches the torches to burn, to emit their light. That's how radiant this girl is. So he speaks in all these things. Beauty too rich for use. Okay, here it is. She's a snowy dove hanging out with crows. You get that majestic bird. This time it's a dove with crow reference. And turns out Benvolio's totally right. Okay, Rosalind nowhere to be seen. She is a crow now. Okay, well, she's hanging. I mean, Romeo doesn't notice her. Juliet's amongst Rosalind, who is now being called a crow by Romeo. All right. Okay. And then we're going to go to a line 92-ish as we scroll down. Okay, here we have Romeo actually deciding to go and meet and interact with Juliet. And the first thing he does is takes her hand. Come back for a bit of a bonus narrative on this section here of script. And we'll talk about how this is a built-in dialogue sonnet poem that follows the rules of sonnet poetry as a bit of a bonus look at the first words that Romeo and Juliet exchange. So come back for another video and take a look at what I have to say about a Shakespearean sonnet and the exchange of words between Romeo and Juliet here. It's well worth the analysis. So I want to point that out. And then we get to the point where Romeo asks, right here, sorry, what is her mother, or who is her mother, nurse? And the nurse says, the lady of the house. And Romeo says, is she a Capulet then? Oh, my life is my foe's debt. Right here he says that he's in, okay, my life, Juliet, my everything is my foe, my enemy. Oh, and it's just this impossible love at this point. Now, Juliet is the exact same reaction, and let's go down to her. Juliet asks, because they had been separated, Juliet asks, who is that yonder gentleman? And eventually she gets to the one that, this one, the one that would not dance. I know not, says the nurse. So she says, go ask his name. And the nurse goes and comes back. His name is Romeo, and a Montague. But Juliet says, foreshadowing here, if he be married, so hopefully he's single, my grave is like to be my wedding bed. Here's an example of foreshadowing. My grave is like to be my wedding bed. Come back to that one, or at least we might have this memory of that line when we get towards the end of the story. Okay. Oh no, my only love sprung from my only hate. Romeo says, my life, my everything. Who is my enemy? And Juliet says, my only love is the only one I hate. And because of the feud. So both have the exact same reaction. All right. And that wraps it up. In fact, that wraps up all of Act 1. You can go ahead and do the review now to see your comprehension there. Don't forget, if you want, to go ahead and check out the Shakespearean Sonnet video as well, as we narrate a little bit more about that interaction between Romeo and Juliet for the first time. And now the play sets us up to know that, oh, these two lovers are fully in love, yet they can't because they're absolute worst enemies and they shouldn't love. So that's the main conflict that we're going ahead with at this point. And if that doesn't draw you into a fantastic story, I don't know what will. All I gotta say is, don't be lame. Come back and we will check out the next part once it's posted for you. Take care.